What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey Larry. So this is my first time doing a podcast episode in a few weeks. I did a few episodes live on air in the WZBC studio, live on air over the last few weeks, but I haven't done a podcast episode in a while, so I'm excited to do so today. I'm going to talk about the NBA trade deadline. I know I already mentioned the Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis trade. I also mentioned the De'Aaron Fox trade already, so I won't talk about those again, but I'm going to talk about some other trades that have gone down in the NBA before the trade deadline. After that, I'm also going to talk about the Pro Bowl, give a quick recap of that. I know the Pro Bowl no one really cares about too much, but the last few years I've given a recap of it, very brief, just to give my thoughts on how it went. So I'll do that again today. Then I'll talk about Eli Manning, who is not a first ballot Hall of Famer into the NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame. I'll give my thoughts on that situation. I'll preview Super Bowl 59, which is tonight at 6:30 between the Philadelphia Eagles and Kansas City Chiefs. And then at the end, I'll talk about a report that just came out about the future of Aaron Rodgers in New York with the New York Jets. So let's start off with the trade deadline. And my first segment is going to be about the Phoenix Suns. And Kevin Durant is staying put in Phoenix. And obviously that's something that the Suns probably were hoping for. They were hoping to probably try to keep Durant, and they were hoping to try to move Bradley Beal. That obviously ended up not being the case, and I think they realized the only way to get out of this situation right now and maybe try to salvage something and have some sort of a future would be to move on from Kevin Durant, because Bradley Beal has a no-trade clause, and when you trade for a player with a no-trade clause, you are essentially married to them. You have no way out when a player has a no-trade clause. And Phoenix knows exactly what they were getting themselves into when they traded for Bradley Beal. But they didn't need him at the end of the day. They really didn't. And I feel bad for Bradley Beal. I watched the Suns game earlier this week, and I saw that Bradley Beal can still play. He can still hoop. But he just cannot be a third option. And that's the problem with the Phoenix Suns. He can't be a third option, especially when Durant, Beal, and Devin Booker all want the ball in their hands. It's really hard for three players that play very similarly on offense to be in the same lineup. So that was a problem with this team. They really didn't need Bradley Beal, and I feel bad for him. I know a lot of people blame him for the reason why the Suns are the way they are, but at the end of the day, the Suns knew exactly what they were getting themselves into when they traded for a player with a no-trade clause, and obviously it's now come back to hurt them and potentially end, their era with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker together in Phoenix. Which now Kevin Durant stays put. Phoenix did try to trade Durant before the trade deadline, and I think that's something that they're going to try to look into again this offseason. I do think they move on from Durant at some point. Durant is still a prolific scorer, and I don't think Phoenix necessarily wants to trade him, but they have no option, like I mentioned. They know the only way to get out of this Bradley Beal situation is to move on from Kevin Durant, and then maybe when they get draft picks back in return for Durant, they can potentially trade Bradley Beal alongside a premium first-round pick, and maybe somebody will take him on and chew the money. I know a team like Utah is always interested in doing that. Utah always takes on players. We've seen them do that with Russell Westbrook and the Lakers, and obviously with the Clippers and PJ Tucker. They'll take on players just to essentially chew the money, pay them the money that they are supposed to get in a buyout, and then take whatever draft picks are going to be in that deal in return. So they could end up doing that maybe for Bradley Beal at some point down the line. I wouldn't be surprised if they did that just to try to get more draft capital, and we'll see what happens. I don't think Phoenix is going to be able to trade Bradley Beal in the offseason. I think they need to trade Durant first, get some assets for Durant, and then potentially maybe package something they got in return for Durant alongside Bradley Beal to try to get out of his contract. And we'll see what happens. As for Kevin Durant, still a very, very good scorer, 26.9 points per game, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 40% shooting from three. He could definitely still help a team. There's no doubt about that. Phoenix knows that. They know at the end of the day, Durant is still a great player, but the only way to get out of this Bradley Beal era is to potentially move on from Durant, because this big three has not worked at all. It's been disappointing. I didn't really like that trade when they went out and made it. I knew Bradley Beal was a big-time scorer at one point in Washington, having 2 consecutive seasons at one point with 30 points per game as an average, which is very, very impressive. But the reality is this team just has too many players that are very similar in Durant, Booker, and Beal. So they're going to end up moving on from Durant at some point, I believe, and then potentially try to move on from Beal after that. They're not going to move on from Devin Booker. I'd be very surprised if they did so, especially considering he's younger, and also he is a homegrown talent there, a player that they drafted in Phoenix. So the sun is setting in Phoenix. I think everybody acknowledges that, especially when Durant ends up being on the trade block right before the trade deadline. I think that was more of a desperation to some degree. I think they knew the only way to get out of this era is to move Durant, like I already mentioned. And I don't think that's something that they necessarily want to do, but they really do not have an option right now. Maybe they didn't get back enough in return in potential trade packages, so they said we'll hold them until the offseason. But I think if you look at this Phoenix Suns team, Durant can still get back a very good return, considering he's still a very good player, even though he's older and and is getting up there in age. He's still a very good scorer, still one of the best players in the NBA to this day, and he could definitely still help a team win. I know he did potentially have a chance to go back to Golden State, and that's something that he actually said no to, even though he doesn't have a no-trade clause. I think Golden State just respected his decision to not want to go back to Golden State. So Golden State moved on from Durant and ended up going out and getting Jimmy Butler. The Warriors also gave Jimmy Butler a 2-year, $121 million extension as well to keep him in Golden State after the season ends. So that's something that Jimmy Butler wanted. He wanted more money. That's something that Miami didn't want to do. They were not willing to give him money. So he ends up getting that from the Golden State Warriors through this trade, got an extension right away. The Warriors also got 2 second-round picks from the Heat and also cash considerations from Miami. The Heat got Andrew Wiggins, Kyle Anderson, both of them going to Miami from the Golden State Warriors. They also got Davion Mitchell in this trade from the Raptors, and they also got a 2025 first-round pick, which was a protected first-round pick for the Golden State Warriors. The Jazz were also involved in this trade. They got KJ Martin from the Pistons via the 76ers. They also got Josh Richardson, a 2028 second-round pick, a 2031 second-round pick, and cash considerations from Miami. The Pistons got Dennis Schroeder, Lindy Waters III, and a 2031 second-round pick. And the Raptors received P.J. Tucker, a 2026 second-round pick, and cash considerations in this 5-team deal. So a very heavy deal here. A lot of teams involved, a lot of players going in different directions. Jimmy Butler obviously going to Golden State is something that he wanted. He wanted to go to Phoenix, but obviously that ended up not working out since Bradley Beal was not a player that the Miami Heat wanted in return. They didn't want that contract, so they weren't trading him to Phoenix. And so Jimmy Butler ends up getting essentially a second option, it seems like, in Golden State. In 6 years in Miami, he led the Miami Heat to 2 NBA Finals appearances, losing to the Lakers and the Nuggets. Jimmy did have a special run with the Heat. There's no doubt about that, but things did turn sour between him and Pat Riley over the last 45 days or so. Not really surprising to see him go. I figured that they were going to move on from him at some point, considering he became a distraction and really was just trying to get his way out of Miami in any way possible. Golden State made this move since they know they're coming up on the end of the Steph Curry era, and they had to reach for something. Their goal has been to try to pair Steph Curry with another All-Star over the last few seasons. Now they get their wish. They pair Jimmy Butler with Steph Curry to potentially go for one more run, maybe 2 more runs with Steph Curry as a Warrior. I do like this fit in Golden State for Jimmy Butler, a very good franchise with recent history of winning over the last decade or so. Golden State also gave him money, as I said, 2 years, $121 million, which is a big extension there, considering Miami didn't want to give him that at all. And if you look at where he is now in Golden State, I think it's a good fit. Doesn't have to be the number one option. Can let Steph Curry still space the floor, and Jimmy can obviously space the floor as well by being able to drive down to the paint and then kick it out to Steph Curry. I think it's a very good fit. He's a good defensive player, and obviously when he is locked in and focused, he is one of the most talented players in the NBA. I know he hasn't put up big numbers in recent years, but he still is a very good player, and I know a lot of people expect him to always turn things on in the playoffs, which is always something you can expect from Jimmy Butler. You can always see him play harder in the playoffs than he does in the regular season, but I think being on a new team right now, obviously having a change of scenery and getting his way, not being in Miami anymore, I think he's going to be happy to be in Golden State, so I think you'll see a more motivated Jimmy Butler with the Warriors. Another trade that happened was DeAndre Hunter going from the Atlanta Hawks to the Cleveland Cavaliers in exchange for Georges Niang, Karis LeVert, 3 second-round picks, and 2 first-round pick swaps. DeAndre Hunter is a great scorer, and he makes this Cleveland offense even more dynamic. He's had a very good season in Atlanta. I think the Cavs are the best team in the East right now. They play strong, cohesive basketball on each end and have 5 players that can give you 18 to 20 points a night. So they're going to be a very, very hard team to beat in the playoffs. Not a bad return here for Atlanta, who is likely approaching a rebuild. Atlanta made another trade as well, trading Bogdan Bogdanovic to the Los Angeles Clippers in exchange for Terrence Mann and Bones Highland. They also sent 3 second-round picks in this deal as well to the LA Clippers. I said a week or so ago that I believe Terrence Mann and Bones Highland would be moved on from at the deadline. Bones just barely ever played, so he never really had a chance to succeed in LA. And it seemed like Terrence Mann lost his fit on the team with Derrick Jones Jr. and Nick Batum taking some minutes that he used to get, and obviously fell out of the starting rotation as well. It was really expected that they were going to move on from these 2 guys, at least in my opinion. Never forget, though, Game 6 of the 2021 Western Conference semifinals. The Clippers had a big comeback win against the Utah Jazz, where Terrence Mann went off for 39 points, 7-10 shooting from 3, 15-21 shooting from the floor, and 2 steals in 36 minutes. And I always look back at that game as the foundation of me being a Clippers fan. That was the day, the true start of me becoming a fan of the Los Angeles Clippers. It was June 18th, 2021. And I remember watching that game on TV, loving the way the Clippers played. Kawhi Leonard obviously wasn't playing, but they had a lot of guys that were putting up big-time performances. Terrence Mann obviously on offense. Reggie Jackson had some clutch shots in that series, in that playoff run as well. Marcus Morris had his moments. Paul George was great on both ends of the floor. Nick Batum was stepping up in some moments. Luke Kennard was very good. I love the way that team played. And I remember watching that game saying, I'm not just a fan of Paul George or Kawhi Leonard. I'm a fan of this team in general. That was the true start of me being a Clippers fan. That was the day when the seeds were planted and I became a diehard fan of this team. Truly. Terrence Mann was a big part of me being a fan of this team, obviously alongside Paul George as well and Reggie Jackson. But I'll always be thankful for Terrence Mann. He was a big part of me being a fan of this team. I loved the way he played. I loved the way that everybody played on that Clippers team back in 2021. All heart, all hustle, and a pure Clipper mentality that's all about never quitting and giving it everything you got, no matter who's on the floor, no matter the situation, no matter the score, no matter the series score as well. The Clippers always found a way to show up and give it everything they had, no matter who was out with injuries, no matter who was on the floor. They always found a way to respond, especially in that 2021 run. So I'll always be thankful for Terrence Mann. As I said, that 39-point game against Utah in Game 6 in 2021 was a huge reason I became a fan of this team, and I'll always be thankful for that performance and that Clippers team. It was a special run that year, and I've been a big, big fan ever since. As for Bogdanović, he had some extra scoring for the Clippers that they need off the bench. That was something that they really needed, was getting somebody off the bench that could score when James Harden and Norman Powell were on the bench. They did cut ways with Kevin Porter Jr. in a trade, who was one of their primary scorers off the bench, but was inconsistent and also played some poor defense. So that was definitely an issue with KPJ. So it made sense to potentially move on from him. I was a little bit shocked with them trading him, but if you go out and get Bogdanović to potentially bolster the bench unit, it made sense to potentially move on from Kevin Porter Jr., considering he's a low contract and obviously wasn't really the best fit defensively for the Clippers off the bench. But I do wish KPJ well in his new home in Milwaukee, and obviously the same goes to Terrence Mann and Bones Highland. There are reports that Bones Highland is going to be waived by the Atlanta Hawks, which is obviously disappointing. Bones is just never really getting the opportunity that he deserves. He's a very talented player and a very good scorer. I'll always have faith in Bones Highland, and I'm thankful he was a Clipper, even though it was very short-lived, and he never really got too big of an opportunity. When he did get an opportunity, I was always watching. I'm a big fan of his talent. I think he's a very good scorer, and I'm a big fan of his rap music as well. Bones is a very talented player overall and a very talented person. Wishing him all of the best in the future, no matter where he ends up. I wish things worked out in LA with the Clippers, but I know when he gets a chance somewhere, whether it be with, let's say, the Utah Jazz, potentially a team that's rebuilding and maybe gives him a shot for the end of this season, or maybe even potentially a contender like the Cleveland Cavaliers. No matter where Bones ends up, I think he could be a very good player in this league. I truly believe in him, and I'm wishing him all of the best. Moving on to the Los Angeles Lakers, they made a big surprise trade, obviously getting Luka Doncic, and then they made another one, packaging Dalton Knecht, Cam Reddish, a 2031 first-round pick, and a 2030 first-round pick swap for Hornets center Mark Williams. But it was reported late last night that the trade fell through due to a field physical by Mark Williams. The Lakers are now left with not much help at the center position. Obviously, Anthony Davis being gone is a big loss for them in the paint, and now they're left with Jackson Hayes as their starting center. I wasn't really a big fan of this team after they made that trade for Luka Doncic. I thought obviously Luka was good potentially for the future, but I thought right now, I don't think necessarily getting rid of AD helps this team potentially contend one last time with LeBron James. I don't think the Lakers are really capable of winning more than a playoff series at best, especially now without really a big man they can rely on in the paint. I think this team is potentially in trouble for this season. Next up, we have the Pelicans trading Brandon Ingram to the Toronto Raptors. The Pelicans honestly should have just rebuilt and traded CJ McCollum, Zion Williamson, and Brandon Ingram. Obviously, Ingram ends up being the one that's gone. But I do think potentially Zion Williamson is a guy they trade this offseason. I think they should build around Trey Murphy III, who's a very young player and a future all-star in my opinion. That kid is an absolute stud and will be a top 15 player in the NBA one day. A very good scorer, very fun to watch. Watched him play probably around 4 or 5 times this year, and I was very impressed. As for Brandon Ingram, he is a free agent after the season is over, but Toronto made this move to potentially try to lure him into signing a free agent contract after the season ends. Next up, we have Davion Mitchell getting traded. I already mentioned him being traded in that 5-team deal that sent Jimmy Butler from Miami to Golden State. Mitchell went from Toronto to Miami in this deal. I love the way he plays. He's a lockdown defender who shows up every single night with all heart and all hustle. He'll fit in very well with the Heat culture. And the last thing I'm going to talk about in the NBA is a report that came out yesterday that Ben Simmons will be joining the Los Angeles Clippers after his buyout with the Brooklyn Nets. Not very shocked that he was bought out by the Brooklyn Nets. I think it was kind of expected to some degree. And I said about a week ago to some of my friends that I thought he would be a great fit with the Clippers, considering they do need a guy off the bench that can be a facilitator and a playmaker when James Harden is not on the floor. And this ends up being a very good fit for Ben Simmons. He's a great low-risk, high-reward potential acquisition. When he's on a vet minimum with no expectations, I think obviously he has a chance to potentially be a good rotation player for this Clippers team, especially considering they didn't have to go out and trade for him or give him a lot of money. that obviously does help this team. If things don't work out at the end of the day, you can just move on very easily rather than obviously if you trade for him or give him a big contract. It's obviously a little bit harder to get out of his contract in that case. But in this case right now, a veteran minimum will be what he ends up getting. So low expectations. I think that's going to help Ben Simmons. He's averaging 6 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists this year in 33 games at Brooklyn. Since being traded to Brooklyn in the 2022-2023 season from Philadelphia, he was part of that James Harden trade. He only played in 90 games while missing 189 games with the Brooklyn Nets. He did earn $125 million from Brooklyn with 69 starts. So obviously he was hurt for a good amount of his tenure with the Brooklyn Nets. If you include play-in games, regular season games, and postseason games, Simmons only played in just 90 of a possible 251 games with the Brooklyn Nets. That's just 36% of potential games between the play-in games, the postseason, and the regular season that Ben Simmons played in that he could have. So obviously a very, very low amount of games, just 36% of games he played in that he could have potentially played in as a Net. He finished his time with the Nets with 6 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists as his average. Also a steal per game as well. I think people forget how good he was at one point. In Philadelphia, he won Rookie of the Year, was a 2-time All-Star, a 2-time finalist for Defensive Player of the Year, and also an All-NBA selection. He's a very good player on defense, a good playmaker as well with good court vision. That's exactly what this Clippers team needs. That's why I wanted Ben Simmons to be a Clipper, and I'm really excited to see what he does in a Clippers uniform. And honestly, I can't complain with the way things have gone for the Clippers over the last 3 or 4 years. It seems like every time I want a player, they end up being a Clipper, honestly. I wanted Russell Westbrook a few years ago. He ends up being a Clipper after being bought out and waived by the Utah Jazz. And then obviously John Wall, I was excited. He was a Clipper at one point. I wanted James Harden, and I wanted PJ Tucker. That obviously ended up happening, even if things didn't necessarily work out with PJ Tucker. I did want that trade to happen. And then if you look at this situation here, I wanted Ben Simmons. The Clippers went out and got him. I wanted Derrick Jones Jr. The Clippers went out and got him as well in free agency this year. So a lot of players that I've wanted on the Clippers over the last few seasons, they've went out and they've gotten. Obviously, it hasn't really ended up in the result that they wanted. It hasn't been an NBA Finals ring, but we'll see how things hold up in the future. I think this team is capable of winning a playoff series. Maybe not 2, but I think at least 1, the way things stand right now. They probably need some guys to step up to try to win more, but there's always potential they could go out and add more guys on the buyout market, especially considering they got themselves below the first apron after trading PJ Tucker and Terrence Mann. So we'll see what happens here with the rest of the season for the Clippers, but I'm excited to see what Ben Simmons does in a Clippers uniform. I know a lot of Clippers fans are excited about this acquisition, considering it's on a veteran minimum and we didn't have to give up too much. But I know if Ben Simmons has a bad game shooting the ball and has a couple, threes that go off the side of the backboard or something, or a bad missed layup, I'm sure fans will be trying to run him out of town. Even if they're a fan of the acquisition right now, fans turn very, very quick. So hopefully Ben Simmons has a good start to his time with the Clippers. I think that'll potentially maybe give him some confidence going forward. I know obviously he's had some injuries, some bad luck over the last few years, but he's still a good player, especially considering he has very low expectations. I wasn't necessarily a big fan of Ben Simmons in the past, especially considering he missed too many games for my liking. But at the end of the day, when you have no expectations around him and he's on a veteran minimum contract, I think that helps the Clippers at the end of the day. If things don't work out, you can move on from him very easily. So now I'm going to move on and talk about the 2025 Pro Bowl games, which ended up being an NFC win. They won that 76-63 overall between the flag football games and the skills competitions. On the Thursday night skill events, the NFC won 14-7. And then on Sunday of last week, the punt perfect competition, the AFC won that. Came down to a thrilling sudden death, which was something that nobody really expected, but I felt like to some degree that's the way the NFL wanted it, something that really just created some drama around punters, especially considering there really isn't too much that they could do, especially when it's a flag football game. This was all the punters could really do, is do a skill competition against each other to try to participate in the Pro Bowl weekend. And obviously ended up being a very good battle between Marlon Humphrey and Logan Cook for the AFC, and then for the NFC it was Kyle Juszczyk and Jack Fox. Ended up going toe-for-toe down the line, and the AFC ended up winning that. Then in the Madden NFL head-to-head game, the NFC got blown out by the AFC. The great football race, the NFC won that one by a very close margin. That ended up being basically a photo finish, but Eli Manning crossed the line on the sled just before Peyton Manning did. And then in the tug-of-war game, the NFC dominated that yet again. Seeing Dexter Lawrence and Vita Vea line up together on the same team, you can't really expect to compete against those two guys if you're the AFC. And then in the flag football game, it was fun to watch. The NFC ended up winning the Pro Bowl games, I said, for the third straight year, making it a 3-0 record for Eli Manning against Peyton Manning in the Pro Bowl games. Add that to his Hall of Fame potential resume. My MVP of the game was Cowboys kick returner Kevontae Turpin. It was great strategy by Eli Manning to have Turpin in the game to play defense in blitz essentially the entire game. That definitely did a damage on the AFC and their quarterbacks. And he ended up wreaking havoc. He was a big part of the NFC winning the game. To my count, I think Turpin had 4 flag pulls, a sack on an extra point, and a pressure that led to a pick 6 of Drake May. So he had his fingerprints all over the game in general. I know he ended up not winning the MVP, but he was the MVP in my eyes. Malik Neighbors had a great catch, a ridiculous catch in that game. Doesn't matter if it's a flag football game or a real football game, his talent is off the charts. They did try to make the game as fun and as playful as possible, especially in the second half of the game. Jahmyr Gibbs played defense, which was cool at the end. He had a nice interception on a conversion attempt by the AFC, and then on his return, which he almost took all the way to the house, half the AFC bench basically jumped on the field to stop him, which was funny to see. Jackson Smith and Jigba got a chance to play quarterback, threw a pick 6. I think it was in his first pass attempt, which was obviously tough to see for him, but it obviously made things interesting putting other guys at quarterback. Malik Neighbors did match up at cornerback against Jamar Chase, which was really cool. Jared Goff and Dexter Lawrence poured Gatorade on Eli Manning at the end, which was funny to see. And then Eli Manning and Peyton Manning going at it and pushing each other in the foam pit was pretty playful and funny too. Their rivalry together as brothers definitely made the games more entertaining to watch. Will the Pro Bowl ever be tackle football again? No, but I think the NFL found a format that could still be fun and entertaining. I know it's not the exact same, but they had no option. They had to adapt. I think this is something that's been a success over the last few seasons. So now I'm going to move on to talk about Eli Manning, who on Thursday night, the Hall of Fame ballot was announced for the 2025 Football Hall of Fame inductees, and Eli Manning was not a first ballot Hall of Famer. And I was a little bit surprised. I thought Eli had a good shot to make it as a first ballot Hall of Famer. That obviously ended up not being the case. I know a lot of people had question marks about his record, and people said that if you take away his 2 Super Bowl championships, he's an average quarterback. But I don't think people are looking at the numbers. I know if you look at his accolades, the 2 Super Bowl championships and the 2 Super Bowl MVPs do show up the most. And obviously he was a 4-time Pro Bowler as well. But if you look at his passing stats, Eli Manning was in the top of just about every single category. 366 passing touchdowns, 11th most in NFL history. 57,023 passing yards, 11th all-time in NFL history. 4,895 passes completed, 11th all-time in NFL history. I know the record was 117 and 117, so he had a 500 record in his career, but you really can't blame Eli Manning for the Giants not putting an offensive line around him for the last 6 or 7 years of his career. You add in the historic plays that Eli was a part of during his career. The best pass, in my opinion, that I've ever seen was his completion with 3 minutes and 45 seconds left against the Patriots in Super Bowl 46. The Giants were down in that moment, down 17-15. And Eli steps up in the pocket right around his own 5-yard line and threw a 43-yard strike in the air on the sidelines into a tight window to Giants wide receiver Mario Manningham against double coverage. 0 room, but pure precision by Eli Manning in a fearless throw that we've obviously seen him make before in the past. The pass to David Tyree, I know may have been luck, but at Super Bowl 42 and that pass to Tyree, Eli did find a way to stay up and showed some athleticism getting out of that potential sack, and obviously stepping up and heaving it to Tyree was a great play. But I think that Manningham pass was the best pass that I've ever seen in my life. I think it's one of the best passes in football history. And I think a lot of people forget that when Eli Manning won his 2 Super Bowl rings, he had to go on the road to Green Bay in each of the 2 Super Bowl runs, had to beat San Francisco on the road, had to beat Dallas on the road. Eli always found ways to elevate his game and win in the biggest moments. He is for sure a first ballot Hall of Famer in my eyes, even if that ended up not being the case in the Pro Football Hall of Fame ballot this year. I think he should have been a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I do think he gets in at some point. I'm not too worried about that. Eli is one of 6 quarterbacks ever with 2 Super Bowl MVPs, so that's obviously a class that's very exclusive on its own. And then you look at the fact that he beat Tom Brady twice in the Super Bowl. The Patriots had a chance to go 19-0, the first team in NFL history to ever do so back in 2008, and Eli Manning found a way to beat them in that game, and that was obviously a very special moment for the Giants. Then they ended up beating the Patriots again just 4 years later in 2012, beating Tom Brady and Bill Belichick again, who were probably the 2 guys that most people would pick as the best coach and the best quarterback of all time in NFL history. But Eli Manning found a way to beat them not only once, but twice. He was also a Walter Payton Man of the Year award winner in 2016. Obviously shows that he does a lot of great things off the field as well. I think Eli Manning is a first ballot Hall of Famer in my eyes. I know that ends up not being the case, but I think he ends up getting in, hopefully, in next year's ballot. Now moving on to my Super Bowl 59 preview. It's a rematch of Super Bowl 57, Kansas City Chiefs, Philadelphia Eagles. The Chiefs are looking to become the first team in NFL history to three-peat, while the Eagles are looking to rewrite history after the loss in the Super Bowl to Kansas City just a few years ago. Per Adam Schefter, Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes will be the 4th quarterback rematch in Super Bowl history, joining Eli Manning and Tom Brady, Troy Aikman and Jim Kelly, Terry Bradshaw and Roger Staubach. Obviously, all of those being legendary quarterbacks going at it for more than just one time in the Super Bowl. This will now be the 2nd matchup between Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. In each of the 3 previous instances where quarterbacks faced each other again in the Super Bowl, all 3 of the times in that 2nd game rematch, the same quarterback won. So the same quarterback won both of those games in all three of those matchups, which is a very interesting fact. Obviously, Aikman beat Jim Kelly twice, Eli beat Tom Brady twice, and then Terry Bradshaw beat Roger Staubach twice as well. We'll see what happens in this game today. The Eagles, I think, are now a better team this year than they were 2 years ago. They're being powered by former Giants running back Saquon Barkley, who was Offensive Player of the Year in the NFL, 2,005 rushing yards in the regular season with 5.8 yards per carry and 13 rushing touchdowns. Just an excellent season overall for him. I think if you look at this Eagles team, they have a great offensive line, probably the best in the NFL as an offensive line, and a very good offense. He had a better chance doing all of these numbers that he did with the Eagles than he did with the Giants. I don't think it was even possible for him to put up those numbers with this Giants offensive line, especially considering what the Giants would have around him on offense as weapons. Besides Malik Neighbors, the Giants really didn't have too many dangerous players on offense this season. I do like Tyrone Tracy a lot, though. I think the Giants at the end of the day saw that you really can't pay a running back during a rebuild. I know a lot of people were critical of them, but I think they ended up making a right decision in that regard, considering the Giants had Saquon Barkley last year. They still were not a good team, so I don't think necessarily paying him would have made them a better team this season. But props to Saquon. He's had a great season and honestly could have been the MVP. I wouldn't have been surprised considering how much he transformed that Eagles offense. He could have been the MVP in my opinion. Since their Week 5 bye, the Eagles are 15-1 with a plus 27 turnover margin, which is very, very impressive. And their average margin of victory since their bye week is just about 14 points per game, which is very impressive. As for the Chiefs, they've won an NFL record 17 one-score games in a row. They find ways to win the close games, which is a must for a lot of good teams. If you want to win the Super Bowl, you have to be able to win ugly, close games. If the Chiefs didn't have some calls go their way, they may not have won all of those games. I get that. But at the end of the day, every good team has some luck go their way. The Patriots had luck go their way in their run as a dynasty. And obviously the Chiefs have had some luck go their way too. That's just a reality of sports. Luck is sometimes going to be in your favor and sometimes it's not going to be. With all of that being said, I think the Chiefs are more beatable right now than they were in years past. Their offense has taken a slight step back. 2 years ago, they were the best offense in football. Now they're in the middle of the pack in points per game in the NFL. Obviously, they've had some injuries. You look at their offense, Isaiah Pacheco missed a good amount of the season, which was a loss. And then obviously Travis Kelce's getting a little older. We'll see how they play in this game, but I do think this Chiefs offense is more beatable now than they've been in years past. As for my keys to the game, Saquon Barkley's had 100-plus rushing yards in 14 of 19 games this season. The Chiefs' defensive line has been good this year. They have the 8th-ranked rush defense in the regular season, and they held James Cook and Joe Mixon to under 100 yards on the ground in their playoff wins this year. So a key to the game for the Eagles would obviously be Saquon Barkley having another big game, and then for the Chiefs, it's very simple. If their defensive line can find a way to slow down Saquon Barkley, it puts a lot of pressure on Jalen Hurts, who hasn't really had to have too big of a season passing the ball, which I think he's going to need to have a bigger passing game today, especially if the Chiefs are able to keen in on the run game of the Eagles and potentially slow down Saquon Barkley. Jalen Hurts is going to have a good game today passing the ball. Hurts had the lowest amount of pass attempts among starting quarterbacks this year in the NFL, among eligible starting quarterbacks, you could say. And that's because they relied heavily on Saquon Barkley. They didn't really need to throw the ball too much this year. So that's going to be a storyline. Could Jalen Hurts have a bigger game passing the ball today than he's had this year so far? As for Patrick Mahomes, he always finds a way to stay cool, calm, collected in big moments. He's 3-1 in his Super Bowl career. The Chiefs this year are 6-1 when trailing in the fourth quarter, so they find ways to win big games. And then if you look at his career in the fourth quarter, in 9 playoff games, Patrick Mahomes has won 6 of 9 playoff games when trailing in the fourth quarter. 6 of 9 playoff games when trailing in the fourth quarter, which is very impressive. Mahomes just finds a way to win big games. He really does. And this year wasn't as flashy a season. 28 touchdowns, passing to 11 picks in 18 total games. Not his most brilliant season, but the Chiefs are still 17-2. So credit to Andy Reid, who's obviously a big-time coach, and then credit to Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator for the Chiefs, who always gets the most out of his defenses. Guys like Chris Jones, Leo Chenal, Trent McDuffie, all playing big-time football over the last few seasons. He's been very, very impressive as their DC, and we'll see what he does in today's game to try to slow down Saquon Barkley. The last storyline I'm going to mention is Travis Kelce. Could this be it for Travis Kelce? I think if the Chiefs win today's game, I think he keeps playing until they lose. So if the Chiefs win today, I think Kelce plays next season. I think if the Chiefs lose and their streak comes to an end, I think Kelce could potentially retire. I really do. The last thing I'll say about the Super Bowl is may the best team win. I know a lot of people are passionate on each side. Some people don't like the Eagles. Some people don't like the Chiefs. It should be a good game overall. May the best team win today. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about in the NFL and the last thing I'm going to talk about overall in this episode is the report that just came out this morning about Aaron Rodgers and his future with the New York Jets. And I should say this afternoon because this just came out just about 20 minutes ago. News was released today that Aaron Rodgers flew to New York this week to meet with the New York Jets, and the team told him that they are moving on from him. So the Aaron Rodgers era in New York with the New York Jets is over with. Rodgers still had a very good season, even though he's on a bad team. I thought his numbers overall at the end of the year were really good, especially considering early on in the season I watched him play and I thought he could potentially be done as a starting quarterback. It didn't look like he was the same quarterback that he was in years past. When I watched the game probably around week 7 and week 8, I said Aaron Rodgers just does not look right. He doesn't look like he can still win big games in the NFL and put up big numbers. But then at the end of the season, he found a way to progress at the end. I know he still had one bad game against the Buffalo Bills in week 17. But besides that, I thought he finished the season on a very good note. In his final game as a New York Jet, he was 23 of 36 passing, 274 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and an interception. He became just the 4th quarterback since 2018 to throw 4 touchdown passes under pressure, the last being Russell Wilson in week 2 of 2020. He found Davante Adams in that game for one last touchdown connection between them, which was a very nice moment between the two of them. If this is it for Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams together, they were a special duo that I always enjoyed watching, which is why I was always high on Aaron Rodgers' teams. I always loved watching Rodgers and Adams play together. I always believed in these two guys. They had some great memories together and had a great friendship in the NFL. And potentially they could be together again if Rodgers decides to play again. And let's say the Jets do decide to cut Davante Adams. Potentially, Rodgers and Adams could still play together again. Right now, they have 82 touchdowns together, which is the 3rd most in NFL history between a quarterback and a receiver. So that's obviously an unbreakable bond and something that I always enjoyed watching, something that I never really took for granted either. I knew this year was probably potentially going to be a last season for Aaron Rodgers, and I knew at the end of the year it was going to be a question mark whether or not he played next year. So I said, I'm going to watch his last few games because I don't know if this is it for Rodgers. I think he's the most talented quarterback that's ever played the game. I know it's really tough to say considering how many good quarterbacks there have been in the NFL, but pure arm talent and precision, Aaron Rodgers is one of, if not the best, in NFL history. He finished the season with the Jets this year with 28 passing touchdowns. That's the 3rd most in a single season for the Jets franchise. He also had 11 interceptions and just under 3,900 passing yards. At 40 and 41 years old, coming off an Achilles injury, I think that's a very, very impressive season for Rodgers. As I mentioned before, I know it was week 17 when they got blown out against Buffalo, and a lot of people criticized Rodgers and the Jets for coming out of the tunnel in Buffalo listening to Gangsta's Paradise. But I thought that was a moment where Aaron Rodgers just showed that he doesn't really care about what people are saying. He knew that was going to make big-time headlines, and he really didn't care what people thought, which that's why I thought at the end of the day, Rodgers already knows he's proven enough in this league. Obviously a Hall of Fame quarterback and one of the best ever played the game. So I think he knew he really has nothing to prove. That's why he went out week 17. Listening to Gangsta's Paradise, it just seemed like he knew things were going to blow up in the media and people were going to be obviously going at him for listening to that, especially in a game where they got blown out against Buffalo. But it shows he didn't really care what other people thought, which I really liked about Rodgers in that regard. Where will Rodgers end up? If he decides to play again, I'd love to see him stay in New York and be a New York Giant, but I think that's very unlikely. As of right now, the way things are looking, I think he ends up with the Vegas Raiders and he ends up being a Las Vegas Raider next season. We'll see how things work out, though. Anyways, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Enjoy the Super Bowl and take care now. Have a good one.